Hi, everyone. We'll get started in just a minute.
Thanks for joining, everyone. Looking forward to getting started in here. We'll give you guys another second to join. You'll probably notice a chat along the side too. We're going to encourage you guys to engage in the chat throughout the conversation today too. But thank you everyone for joining. We're going to get started in just a sec here.
Awesome. All right. I think we can go ahead and get started. So hello, everyone. Thank you so much for taking some time today to join Spark Hire and SmartRecruiters conversation today on metrics that matter, setting your TA team up for hiring success. I'm Alexa Jackson. I'm the product marketing specialist at Spark Hire, and I'm so excited to introduce the panelists joining us today. We have Spark Hire's own Jeremy Tolan, partnerships manager, and we have Anita Bowness, regional director of customer success at SmartRecruiters. We also have Ryan Frazier from SmartRecruiters, who will kind of be monitoring the chat behind the scenes, and you may hear from him from time to time. So talent acquisition teams across the globe are currently filling new recs at a record pace for what's been coined the great rehiring. But we also are having to fill back roles for the talent that's leaving during the great resignation. So now more than ever, it's critical for your hiring teams to look at key metrics that will give you a more holistic and integrated look at the recruitment process to optimize talent acquisition outcomes. So today we want to talk about how to move beyond traditional hiring metrics to become a more strategic business partner. Before we hear from our panelists, we want to first hear from our participants. So you'll see a poll pop up on your right-hand side, and we want to know, how often are you reviewing your talent acquisition metrics? I'll send that poll out now, and then I'll give you all a moment to respond to it.
I love watching the responses come in real time before we share them out. It's like, ooh, magic.
Yeah, thanks for jumping in with the poll, and thanks for introducing everything, Alexa. We'll give you guys a second to finish up answering the poll here.
All right, it looks like the majority of our participants are kind of split between monthly and weekly. We have a couple people doing quarterly.
Look at that, more people are chiming in.
Now we're getting more answers.
We want to be behind.
Yeah, it still looks though that we are mostly in the weekly to monthly range, which is awesome. So with that, let's dive in. Okay, so before we get into what metrics are most important to be tracking, we want to just kind of take a step back, talk about why metrics are important in the first place and why TA teams should care about and monitor metrics. So Jeremy, can we kind of start with you?
Yeah, I'd love to. And I really like the poll question too. I think it's interesting just to kind of see what some of your peer organizations are doing and thinking about like, well, what is the right answer? How often should we be reviewing these metrics? And I'm sure Anita will speak to this too, but I think it's a combination of all of these different cadences. I think it's important that you're reviewing these key metrics on a weekly basis, monthly, quarter over quarter, biannually, and annually too, because you're going to start noticing trends either in the short term, trends quarter over quarter and year over year too. And that might help you plan for maybe some type of seasonality, or maybe you're just able to help adjust to certain circumstances and really focus on certain metrics that you want to improve. So it's really awesome to see these poll results. But yeah, let's talk about why these talent acquisition metrics are so important. And I really think it goes back to that if you hire a candidate who's best suited for a role, then and best suited for the company too, which is important to point out, then there's an opportunity to get a really significant ROI for the company. And on the flip side of this too, if you hire a candidate that's not very well suited for a role and for a company, that can lead to just as significant negative outcomes as well as a huge opportunity cost. On top of all that, I'm sure you guys are aware that there's a cost associated with having empty seats within your organization. So if you really hone in and focus on improving key metrics at your organization, you're going to be able to hire better candidates who are ultimately going to exceed their goals or expectations that you set out for them, and just improve the organization at large. As an example, if you're moving your candidates through your recruitment process at a really high velocity, then you're also going to make sure that you're not missing out on top candidates that are maybe applying for roles at other companies too, that aren't going to be moving them through the process as fast as you guys are, because you don't want to miss out on a candidate simply because they made it through a hiring process at another company faster and accepted the offer before you could get your offer on the table to them. In addition to that, if you're focusing on improving key talent acquisition metrics, you're going to end up providing a really awesome candidate experience, which should ultimately lead to helping you retain your top talent or even generate referrals that can end up being really great employees too.
I agree on all those points, Jeremy. And I think I'm going to take it back even one more step. And in full transparency, everybody, I am a new hire to SmartRecruiters. This is actually day 90. So I have, in my 90 days with SmartRecruiters, gone through, obviously coming up to day one, the candidate experience. I'm a hiring manager and I'm working with organizations like yourselves on their talent acquisition priorities. But this is not a new topic to me. I think a lot of talent professionals have looked at, why should we care about metrics? Why are they important to us? And are looking to them as a tool for us to understand how we're doing in meeting the needs of our business from a talent acquisition point of view, ensuring that we have the right people in the right roles at the right time to help our businesses achieve those strategic outcomes that they have prioritized. And if I look at metrics, they can help us answer questions that we're getting from hiring managers and our internal stakeholders. They can answer questions like, where exactly do our best candidates come from? What are our best sources of candidates? Where should we be focusing our posting and our recruiting spend in terms of job boards or organic leads or referrals? How long does our application process take for whatever critical role we're trying to fill, whether it's a high volume seasonal recruiting position like Jeremy mentioned earlier, or a really strategic specialty role like a CEO for an organization? How long will it actually take to fill that role? And how do we need to change up and address or adjust our strategies for filling those roles depending on the type of candidate that we are looking for? And then I think most importantly too, when we're looking at the great rehire and the great resignation, looking at data in terms of where are we losing applicants, where are candidates falling out of our process? And then from a candidate experience into new hire, where are we losing employees shortly after hire, and what might be some of the reasons or early warning signals that we can start to track around that? So metrics can give us the language to trend our data, to speak to our business stakeholders and make some pretty key decisions about where we want to prioritize things like our process, efficiencies, our spend, our focus, where we want to lean in and help, how we support our hiring managers. They're a fantastic tool to help us do more.
Awesome. Thanks. That's really helpful to kind of frame the rest of today's conversation, I think. And before we move to our next question, we want to hear from our participants again. So you'll see another poll pop up on your screen. And this time we want to know, what are you experiencing in your organization today? Are you seeing a lot of resignations? Are you seeing a lot of growth? Are you seeing a little bit of both? Are you seeing not much change at all? So let me send out that poll. And I'll give you all a minute again to respond to that.
Thanks everyone again for engaging with the poll and for tuning in today.
I'm leaning in with my, reader glasses because I love watching poll results come up in real time. Because I'm a betting person. I make bets, I make wagers. Where do I think the poll question and the response is going to be? And I think this one, I made the right call. I made the right call in our prep call yesterday. So, for sure.
Definitely, you did actually. Because it looks like the majority of our participants, just over half, are kind of seeing both. They're seeing a resignation and a rehire.
Absolutely.
So that's really awesome. Okay.
And I think that's really illustrated in the types of conversations that we at Smart Recruiters are having with our customers, and I'm sure you guys are too. And bringing it back to examples and stories, a little bit about my situation. I had been with a previous organization for 7 years, and used post-pandemic as an opportunity for me to rethink what it is that I wanted to be doing on the wave of the great rehire, on, the expansion of organizations that have either done very well through the pandemic or are kicking things off and rehiring back into their organizations after a period of disruption. So we're getting a lot of questions coming at us and conversations that we're having with customers around the great rehire and the great resignation. And I think I find this very interesting because pre-pandemic, we were talking a lot about the war on talent and skill shortage. So real pressures on our abilities to get the right people into our organizations and then retaining them. And that language, when we're talking about, X number of job openings across the US and globally versus Y number of available candidates, that discussion was largely driven by topics like job complexity, skill shortages, reduced tenures and roles. So people who are willing to, move around throughout their career and make multiple career changes, and then compounded by the gig economy. Now, those factors I think are still at play today in the great rehire and the great resignation, but it's compounded, it's accelerated, I think, by this velocity component, this, the time demand about getting people back up online as we reopen and re-engage, and to keep up with the mass transition that we're seeing across organizations. I would say almost every organization that we talk to are speaking to us about high volume recruiting needs. How do we expand our candidate pipeline? How do we build internal talent mobility so we can retain people in key roles and critical skills that are so essential to our business? And how do we think differently about our spend, our programs, to get quality candidates in, give them a great candidate experience so that they choose us because there are so many options available to them. So it really is an interesting time. What are you seeing from your point of view?
Thanks, Anita. That is super insightful, and really good to see the different results in the poll too, because it's kind of crazy that you could be experiencing both of these things at once right now. And it's like, how do you plan for something like that? How do you react to something like that at the same time? So pretty crazy times too. And it's not far off from things that we should have always been focusing on too. These are things that you can improve, that you have control over. Something that I would lean into is making sure that you're retaining top talent, like you pointed out, Anita. And part of that is really placing an emphasis on always keeping your candidates and your employees top of mind when you are structuring your hiring and onboarding process. So something that I like to recommend doing as an exercise is try going through your own hiring process as if you're a candidate. And that could help you identify areas for improvement too, and how you can make that candidate experience better. I'm also a huge proponent of using what I refer to as video messages throughout your hiring and onboarding process too, where you're pretty much recording videos of yourself or other team members that you're including in emails to your candidates and employees at different stages of your process to help keep them engaged, keep them enthusiastic, maybe make some personal introductions. So I'm a huge proponent of using video messages too. And I also really recommend conducting what they refer to as a stay interview. And a stay interview is pretty much just a meeting between a manager and their employee where they discuss what's keeping that employee satisfied and wanting to stay with that organization for a while, and what things need to improve at the organization to achieve the same thing too. But what I think is really crucial about these stay interviews is that managers need to make sure they're debriefing with each other after they are conducting these stay interviews, so they can talk about the feedback that they got. They can really identify trends and areas that they can really make really important changes at the organization. And then also just really focusing on improving the overall efficiency of the hiring and onboarding process. So when I think of improving efficiency, I think it's important to think about making sure you're structuring your process so that you're able to build accountability with your team. And I think a huge part of that is leveraging like a recruiting scorecard where you are focusing and evaluating key metrics, which we're about to talk a lot more about too, take a deeper dive into.
Yes.
And holding your team accountable, holding your whole process accountable to make sure you are improving on your key metrics. And something else to consider too is creating differentiation from other employers through your branded content so that you are keeping candidates enthusiastic, you're keeping them interested, you're making them have no doubt in their mind that they want to become the next team member of your organization.
Awesome points.
Thank you both. And I know, Jeremy, you mentioned metrics and looking at that. So now that we've kind of looked at these focus areas, what metrics do you think are most important to look at? Jeremy, okay. We'll start with you.
Some of the ones that I found important just based on conversations with some of the organizations we're helping and just from some of my own experience hiring, definitely time to fill is a really important metric. And a compelling fact that I saw was that the latest talent acquisition benchmarking report by SHRM revealed that a general average for time to fill is around 36 days. So you want to focus on being below that average so that you're faster than other employers. So you're never missing out on the top candidates you're interested in. Another one that's totally related to that too is days in pipeline stage, which is pretty much just paying closer attention to how long candidates are staying in each of these different stages throughout your process and trying to shorten that as much as possible, maybe identifying different bottlenecks at different points in your process. Another one too, I think Anita mentioned it earlier, is cost per hire. And that's because you don't want to put a strain on your budget, but you also really want to focus that you're spending budget in the right places too, which goes to kind of like a sub point of that is source of hire. What are the best sources for your candidates too? And that might differ from role to role, but really getting a good understanding of where you're getting your best candidates, where you're getting the most candidates from, where does it really make sense to invest in sourcing? A couple others would be an offer acceptance rate. You obviously want to make sure your offer acceptance rate is really high because you want to make sure that if you're getting a candidate to that point in your process, the very end where you're ready to actually give them an offer, you want to make sure that they're super interested in working at your organization. You want to leave no doubt in their mind that they want to become your next team member. And another one is first year attrition. So this might not be totally surprising, but a couple of data points that I found compelling were that over a third of turnover in 2018 was due to employees leaving in their first year. And almost half of new employees who left did so within their first 90 days. So really making sure you're providing a really great experience to your candidates, to your employees, getting them indoctrinated within the organization and helping them achieve success really early on is super important. And to go along with that too, you want to focus on your average employee tenure, where I saw that in the beginning of 2018, the median length of time US workers stayed with their employer was 4.2 years. And that's an average, so it could easily be swung by outliers on either side of it. But making sure that you're keeping your average employee tenure high is going to be directly tied to that first year attrition too, and making sure that employees are staying beyond that first year and staying with you guys for a while. And the last one that I wanted to point out before I turn it over to Anita would be the candidate satisfaction, pretty much like an NPS score. How satisfied were your candidates throughout your hiring process, and then the onboarding process beyond your hiring process too is going to be super important. And that just kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier, is really making sure you're keeping your candidates and your employees top of mind throughout this entire process.
Absolutely. So if you're watching my face on the screen, I'm not quite sure if you have us side by side in a Brady Bunch view or a Hollywood Squares kind of view. I was nodding a lot as Jeremy was giving those examples. I think the examples that Jeremy has given illustrate that it's not just about the top of funnel candidate high to hire metrics that we care about here. It is, the candidate experience and the early employee experience. And sometimes that means that we need to partner outside of our core teams. We as TA professionals, talent acquisition professionals, maybe in a functional area, and we're aligned with other areas of the business that also have an impact on our candidate experience and our new employee experience. So some of those metrics around attrition, after the first 90 days or the first year, we may say as TA professionals, well, we don't really impact that because, that's up to our learning professionals or the hiring managers, but we're all part of the same team. And if we don't get it right, then that pressure comes back to us as TA professionals because we have to replace them, or we have to identify how do we find out the reason why so that we plan for that as we go out and we source again. So I think the examples that we've given, illustrate that we are business partners and we do support the ongoing success of the business. I also want to illustrate that there are so many different metrics that we can focus in on. And it's funny, I was trying to characterize on a continuum and asked a number of my colleagues, if their experience is similar to mine, that when you ask somebody, what metrics do you care about? We range from people saying, I really don't know, I'm so overwhelmed, you tell me where I should begin, to organizations that are tracking everything under the sun. And it makes it very challenging to say, this is the best metric that you should start with. So I'm going to suggest that we start with where your biggest priority hiring needs are, or conversely, where you have the most critical talent area that ties directly to what your business needs to be able to deliver or do to be successful, right? Like hiring success means you've got the right people in the right roles at the right time. And so the metrics that you might want to focus on, these are all important metrics, but the ones that you might want to prioritize getting a little bit better on or really doubling down on during this period of time should probably most closely align to where your biggest problem is that you're trying to fix or the need you're trying to solve. So for example, if you are looking at high volume recruitment because you have to rapidly scale or ramp up to deal either with growth or reopening, the metrics you might want to take a look at is how do I get more candidates in at top of funnel? So things like our source mix, where do our top candidates or prospects come from? If we look historically at our trend data over time, where are candidates that are successful in this role coming from? And what candidate conversion by source metrics are we able to track? So if we're getting candidates through organic applications through our career site versus LinkedIn versus paid job boards, et cetera, what are the conversion rates like so that we can make some downstream decisions, strategic decisions around where do we want to advertise, how do we want to post, where do we want to focus our efforts. And then we can look at things like average source quality rating. If we look at our scorecard results from interview data and candidate sourcing data as we move them through various stages in the funnel, where are our best quality candidates coming from? Maybe slicing that up by areas of our business or roles within our business, because it may not be a one size fits all. Again, using front of house staff in a retail organization compared to a CEO, those sources are probably going to look a little different, and the source mix is going to probably look a little different. So knowing what you're looking for and diving into that. Sourcing spend, if we care about budget, we've got like X amount of budget, but we got to spread it across way more roles than we ever thought we were going to have to staff in 2021. How do we make good decisions around our sourcing spend in terms of both total spend in budget and then percentage of spend vis-a-vis salary on the job? So cost per hire, but looking at it a little bit differently. There's also, we talked about internal talent mobility. If that's a strategy that we want to look at and double down on as a way to prevent or buttress against the Great Resignation, taking a look at how we can beef up our programs and start to track number of internal applications for open job recs, number of internal hires, and then the net hiring score, or that quality NPS type score that Jeremy was mentioning, and I'll talk about that in a minute, of internal hires versus external hires. So painting a picture and seeing, do we get a better source and a better quality applicant from our internal hires, and how can we accelerate those programs? And we also have examples of organizations that are really doing point solutions on combining the two and looking at referrals as a way to build candidate pipeline at top of funnel and bring them down. Looking at metrics like referral source tracking as a percentage of total applications, looking at referrals in terms of conversion rates, number of hires made through referrals. And I've got an example of a customer who's done a very good job at that in terms of, addressing their needs of the great rehire. It's a global fitness and wellness organization that was required to shut down most of its operations during COVID and the pandemic to comply with government and public health regulations. And this resulted in a loss of a large portion of their critical facility and frontline operations staff. And many of those employees had to move on to other sources of employment during the shutdown because you need to work. So as the facilities began to reopen, there was a huge hiring need, and how long it takes to fill a position was probably not the metric that they really cared about. It was, how can we get the right amount of people here on the job on day one, X date in each facility. So we had to work backwards in terms of staffing up for those roles, hiring velocity. And so a strategy that they thought that they could employ and started tracking data on was employee referrals to help source applicants. So employees who have been successful, who have stayed with this organization, reaching out to the employees to say, hey, we've got this massive hiring push. We need to accelerate our hiring needs. We're going to spotlight our open positions and ask that you share with your social networks and your friends and family. And they're tracking the impact of this campaign in our product in SmartRecruiters and are currently seeing a 37% increase in employee referrals year over year. But more importantly, 90% of the employee referrals in 2021 have been for these critical club positions needed in opening. So this conversion rate has driven up applications and hires from referrals to 52% in 2021. And so before in 2020, 39, 52% in 2021. So they're moving that up. And the average candidate rating is 4 out of 5 stars. So better quality candidates, more candidates that we're converting to hires. And so the success of this strategy is proven. And now they're going to leverage it to other areas where they've traditionally gone external for traditional job advertising, and take those successes and those stories elsewhere.
Awesome. That's so helpful, Anita. Thank you so much for kind of talking through all of those metrics. Kind of building on that, can you explain the hiring success methodology and how it can be used as a competitive advantage?
So you might have seen my eyebrows raised. I was looking at the time clock because, as my colleague who is in the background moderating knows, we could probably fill hours on hiring success. But quite simply, it is a methodology and a philosophy that is really anchored around an organization's ability to attract, select, and hire the best talent for any role, on demand and on budget. And it's the core of everything we do here as a business at SmartRecruiters. It is anchored on the belief that if you're successful at hiring key talent, you will be successful in your business priorities. That hiring success and business success are closely intertwined. Much research has, proven that. Good to Great by Jim Collins has a famous quote that's basically the single biggest constraint in the success of my organization is the ability to get and to hang on to enough of the right people. And I think, if we think about our own organizations and the priorities of our senior leaders, our CEOs, that is just accelerating in terms of priority with post-pandemic war on talent, the great rehire, et cetera. So we break down hiring success as focusing on 3 key principles: a compelling candidate experience, right? Because we want to win the hearts and minds of candidates and convince them that our companies are where they want to be. Engaging hiring managers because they care about having the right people in the right role at the right time, because when we get that wrong, they're the ones that feel the pain. And recruiter productivity. So helping us drive efficiencies throughout our recruiting processes and activities so that we can do the hiring and get the right people in the job quickly, efficiently, maximizing the impact of our spend while delivering a great candidate experience. So we have a whole host of resources available at the URL that you see on the screen right now, and you don't need the masterclass from me. Go in, read, there's podcasts, there's a lot of different materials there that can help you unpack what that means and what it can deliver for your organization. But quite simply, how we hire, how we think about hiring is a little bit different. It is looking at how can we have business impact and look at, our traditional talent acquisition metrics in a new light. So in traditional recruiting, we tend to emphasize time to fill, cost per hire, and quality of hire. I mean, obviously people care about that. And those are the questions that we get asked as talent acquisition professionals. We try through the hiring success metrics to move beyond those backward-looking constructs, those backward-looking metrics, and look at how we can use our data to provide insights in real time to drive process efficiency and effectiveness, and look at an integrated and holistic view of topics like hiring budget, so the sum total of your recruiting costs associated with your hires as a percentage of total salary. And what that allows us to do is, understand where we may need to change up our cost per hire on critical roles that may take more time, more focus, more spend on bringing into the organization. And how do we make more strategic, lower cost investments on our high velocity, high volume hires? We take a look at things like hiring velocity, which measures one simple thing, the percentage of jobs filled on time. And so that takes a construct of average time to hire and flips it to say, when do I need somebody in role? When is my target start date? So for example, I have 3 open headcount. 2 are slotted to start on October 1st, 1 slotted to start on December 1st. And then we work backwards in terms of how do we need to drive the recruitment process to ensure we have a starter on that day. That helps us look creatively at how to be a little bit more efficient in things like removing friction and bottlenecks through the process, time and stage. All those things that we would normally look at are still there, but we're asking questions on how we can reduce that to accelerate our hiring velocity. And then lastly, net hiring score. So this is, Jeremy mentioned earlier, NPS type measures, net promoter score, which on a scale of 1 to 10 just sends out a simple pulse survey 90 days post-hire to both the new employee who's been hired, that candidate, and the hiring manager, which is basically, how great is this fit for you in the company? How has your experience been on a scale of 1 to 10? And taking those scores and using NPS style metrics to help keep that trend in a positive territory. We have some organizations where when we started putting this in, they've seen a 68-point increase, constantly being in the positive range of the NPS score, which is telling them it's a lead indicator that we are getting this right. And then we would back that up against some of the lag measures that Jeremy mentioned earlier in terms of retention after 90 days, retention in year 1, performance management results in year 1, that really can help us get into the quality of hire. So that's not to say that these are the only metrics that we look at, but these are the North Star metrics that can help guide our focus as recruiters, have conversations with our business stakeholders in terms of what's important to the business, and really start to drive out efficiencies and programs to ensure that we are delivering hiring success. I'm going to use just one quick example, because there's many, about how we could take a look at source to hire analytics and candidate analytics in this type of construct. So we can use dashboards that roll up a number of different metrics to help us understand the average and then individual applications time spent on each hiring step. We look at that to see, how can we maximize and improve that candidate experience, be timely, be responsive, get them engaged early, keep them moving forward so that they know where they're at each stage of the process, and we're driving excitement. So how we can control that in the back end impacts their experience with us. Analyzing past hiring step bottlenecks and making adjustments. So how can we use automation to reduce the amount of time spent in stage? How do we, address where people tend to get stuck by putting more resources, putting more help, putting more focus, reminders, notifications, etc., and then tracking the progress and drilling down on specific candidate applications and identifying those jobs and team members that need a little extra help in filling. So that's just one example of how we can look at those candidate pipelines to understand the average time it's taking from the high to the hire for both individual jobs, and then looking at a macro level across teams and regions so that we are delivering hiring success for our business. So that's a lot to unpack. I would say dig into the resources that we have available on this link. And we're also going to drop in a link from an article on one of our customers, Aspen Ski Company, around their progress on delivering hiring success through the pandemic, as well as a blog post from one of our SmartRecruiters recruiters in terms of how hiring success shows up in her day-to-day interactions that I think you will find beneficial. So that's a long-winded answer to that one question.
Super, super helpful. And I know that we've even seen in the chat a couple people mentioning other metrics that they would consider, but we would love to hear from you guys as far as please write into the chat and let us know what metrics you track. What metrics you find the most valuable. I know that Anita obviously listed off some awesome metrics to look at, but if there's any other ones that you guys are looking at, we would love to hear them and know what they are.
My colleagues, when I asked them, what would you share? I think when I took them all together, I had 55.
Wow.
Like 55 different data points that when you look at, and again, it comes back to what is the problem you're trying to fix? What is the opportunity that you have? What's the challenge that you have? And prioritizing. So, it's not a case of tracking everything. You can track everything, but where do we want to spend our time, our focus, our insight to benchmark where we're at, identify where we want to improve, and track our progress along the way? That is, I think, the key message that both Jeremy and I agree on. And hope that we can give you some ideas of where you too can begin.
Yeah, it looks like we had a response from Karen who said that she'd add diversity funnel metrics if that's a priority, and see if the data might reveal bias, which is really interesting.
Absolutely. We also have organizations that are looking at improving their diversity funnel metrics in conjunction with their candidate sourcing strategies, and building community programs to identify where we can go ahead and identify and engage with candidates from those groups that we want to target, and how we can nurture and convert them into hires. So, looking at the candidate funnel and at your diversity metrics and marrying the two is something that we see some organizations really starting to drill into as well.
Yeah, and we had another person say candidate interview experience, all awesome metrics.
Yes.
All right, so let's dive into our last question before we open up the floor for some Q&A. So Jeremy, how can video interviewing improve some of these metrics like hiring budget, hiring velocity, net hiring score that Anita mentioned?
Yeah, definitely. And thanks for really unpacking that, Anita. And kind of like what Anita pointed to earlier, when I'm thinking about video interviewing and the impact that it can have, I could probably go on talking about this for a lot longer too, but let's hone in a little more on that improving hiring velocity without putting a big strain on budget, because by using one-way video interviews, your organization is able to interview way more people in way less time. A one-way video interview is where you can set up some questions in advance that candidates record video responses to on their own before a deadline, so that any hiring stakeholders, hiring managers can watch those recorded interviews at their own convenience to decide how they want to proceed with that candidate. And what we've seen with the organizations that are using one-way interviews, it's making their preliminary interview process 3 to 7 times faster than before, but they're also just gaining a lot more valuable insight about candidates too. On top of that, since candidates are able to just do these video interviews on their own time before a deadline, there's really no limit to how many can be happening concurrently, unlike a traditional phone interview where you have to connect with the candidate for maybe 30 minutes at a time. And there's really no scheduling involved too. So there's no back and forth with an email thread or playing phone tag. So none of that time is wasted, and it's a much higher velocity for your process that way. And as an example of that, in one of our case studies from a school district in Texas, they mentioned that they estimate that they now only spend 8 minutes per one-way video interview, which resulted in their hours spent screening candidates being cut to 270 hours annually, which is saving them more than $90,000 per year. So not only is this not putting a strain on budget, it's actually saving money too in the time savings aspect of it too. And what's important to point out too is that being able to get through preliminary interviews faster, it really means two really important things. One of them is that you're able to shave at least days, if not weeks, off of your hiring process. And the second is that you have that opportunity to open up the interview process to a lot more people that you might not have been able to consider much further before, just because of time constraints. So a good example of this is a mining company that we've been able to help, where they used to spend a minimum of 30 minutes screening each applicant. And now when they use one-way video interviews, they cut that screen time down to just 6 to 7 minutes per candidate. So obviously a lot faster than before. And to build on that too, these one-way interviews can really help you make better decisions about candidates too, and a lot faster, like I was pointing out, because by sharing these recordings of the interviews with other hiring stakeholders, you're able to get everyone on the same page about who's going to move forward in your process. And that's going to ensure that hiring managers, any key stakeholders, are able to provide input earlier on in the process. So you're making sure that they're only investing their time and effort later on in the process into these very best candidates that they've already had a chance to review. So a couple of really great examples of that is that an insurance company that we're helping, they went from hiring 10 employees per week to 10 employees per day because they were using these one-way video interviews. Or another case study that we've gathered is from a restaurant franchise, and they mentioned that they save 8 hours per week and found that a candidate is 30% more likely to stay past 90 days if they completed a video interview as part of their hiring process. So not only does that point to the velocity being improved, but also that retention in that initial 90 days being improved too. And I think a lot of that also just has to do with the candidate experience, the hiring manager's experience, which goes back to that other key point that Anita brought up before, is that net hiring score, the NPS scores 90 days after hire, which is taking into account both the candidate or new hire score and the hiring manager score, the interviewer too. So video interviews can really help you move the needle on improving your candidate experience because they don't require any scheduling. It's super convenient for candidates that can do these one-way interviews whenever it's truly convenient for them before a deadline. And same with the interviewers too. They can review the recordings whenever it's convenient for them to help them make a decision at their own convenience that way. And I think what's really unique about this type of experience too is that it empowers candidates to learn a ton about the employer throughout the process too, by seeing videos from the employer, links to social media. There's a lot of different employer branding information that candidates get exposed to throughout this process that also improves their experience too. And when I think about improving hiring manager satisfaction through video interviews, by sharing the video interviews with hiring managers and other key stakeholders that I was talking about earlier, you're really giving them a chance to learn so much about these candidates earlier on in the process, so they're able to make those better decisions about which candidates they want to invest their time and effort into. So they end up being a lot more satisfied with this process. And as an example, I actually saw someone in the chat a moment ago bring up ghosting from candidates, where candidates aren't actually showing up to their interviews. And a really good example of improving this was that an eyelash salon that we've been helping, they reported that they've historically experienced about a 70% ghosting rate among their candidates that they've already invested their time in, who just never showed up for their final round interviews. But since they started using one-way video interviews, nearly 100% of the candidates that they invite to a final round interview end up showing up. So it's really cut down on candidates that maybe just weren't going to show up to that final round interview. Now they're really only investing their time into these candidates that are a lot more invested in this process too.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jeremy. Well, I think this seems like a good stopping point to just make sure that we have time to answer some of the questions that are coming through. So thank you all for your time today. And if you have questions that we haven't addressed yet, please be sure to enter those questions in the chat, and we'll get to as many as we can. I'll give everyone a minute to kind of enter their questions in. And while we wait, I wanted to start by asking some questions that we actually received prior to the start of today's conversation. So the first one we received is, if you had to select one hiring metric to share with your executives, what would that be?
Sure.
I'll go first because I know which one my executive cares about, and I can back it up with the why. It's the hiring velocity. If the need for our business is to ensure we have the talent to achieve our business priorities, the thing that the hiring managers are going to care about from the TA process is getting the people into seats on time and getting them up to full productivity. So the thing that I think is the lead indicator, the North Star metric that we are focusing here on, it's hiring velocity.
I would go along with that too. And a little more specifically too, related to hiring velocity, I really like to review days in pipeline stage, because I think it helps you identify maybe there's specific bottlenecks, or maybe there's certain stages that you're getting candidates through really quickly, and you can learn from how are you doing that so efficiently. But yeah, I think
Absolutely.
any metric that's related to hiring velocity is going to be super important.
Totally agree. Totally agree. And I think a lot of the conversations that we have with our customers and organizations that are looking to accelerate time to hire, so the traditional way that we would look at that, or time to offer, and we're looking sort of backwards, when do you need them to start by? That's hiring velocity. How we can move the needle on that is identifying those process efficiencies along the way, fixing the bottlenecks, automating processes, using video, one-way interviews, knockout screening questions, anything that we can do to reduce time and stage and move candidates along faster, keeps them engaged, keeps them interested in our opportunity. They see momentum, they feel it, and our hiring managers are incented to move it along too, because they know when they need the person to start. So it's a really good cycle of delivering impact and driving efficiencies.
One question that we got before that kind of seems to echo a question that we've gotten in the chat already is, do candidates ever feel like one-way video interviews are impersonal and take away from a good candidate experience? A similar question that we just got in the chat is, how are one-way interviews perceived by candidates? And is this practice best for certain roles?
Sure. I think I should probably jump in on that one. There's definitely certain best practices that you want to follow when you're using something like a one-way video interview. And these are going to help make the experience a lot more personal for your candidates. A lot of that has to do with the information that you're delivering to candidates up front. So you want to give them a lot of context and more information about what to expect with their video interview, how is it being used, make sure you're really clear about the deadline for the video interview. And I think you could incorporate a lot of really interesting technology to make the experience more personal. Like, I'm a huge proponent of what I mentioned earlier is video messages, where you can include a video from yourself or another member of your team, basically talking to the candidate and explaining to them what to expect, congratulating them on making it to the next step of the process, explaining what this video interview is going to be like, letting them know what the steps are going to be like after the video interview, and deadlines for those, like how long it should take for you guys to get back to them after that, why you guys are using video interviews and how it's going to benefit them. And I think explaining that information, including videos of team members throughout your process, including something called like an intro video before a candidate starts a video interview, can go a long way too, as well as recording video questions for the one-way video interviews. So they are one-way in nature, but you can actually pre-record yourself asking the questions so that when the candidate goes to do their video interview, they could actually see yourself or another member of your team asking the questions, which makes it feel a little more personal for them. And it's kind of a unique way for them to meet other team members too throughout the process. So there's a lot of different tools, features that you can use to help make it more personal, but also just making sure you're giving candidates a lot of context and a lot of information up front about what to expect is super helpful too.
Absolutely. I agree. Nothing to add. I think it's a great idea. And I would dare say it's more personal than a cover letter. It's more personal than an automated response. It does create a sense of connection and brings momentum forward. The candidates that are interested will, self-select in and help accelerate the time and stage, move it forward. I think it's a win-win.
We have another question about, how do you recommend addressing amplified bias when utilizing video interviews?
I just started writing about that a little bit in the chat too. I think what's super important to consider is that you're agreeing with your team of interviewers and direct managers. What are the most important questions to ask in these interviews that are going to really help you learn more if a candidate actually possesses the skills needed to do the job? So highly structured questions. And I think what helps too is that there's going to be a lot of consistency. So if you agree on really good structured questions, those questions are going to be the ones that are asked and posed in the same format for the candidate all across the board for that role. And what's really important to consider too is by having these interview recordings, it makes it really easy for different hiring managers or any hiring stakeholders to collaborate around the recordings. So you're able to get a diverse group of opinions instead of just one person talking to the candidate over the phone or reviewing their resume and just making a decision based on their own opinion. You're able to really get that good diverse group of opinions from the rest of your panel too that way. Those are a couple of things that I think of.
Awesome. I have another question. Do you have any guidance around sourcing specific metrics that matter or should matter the most?
Yes, I have some guidance. I think, understand the role that you're trying to fill and the appropriate source for that candidate. So taking a look at historically, where your spend is going. So your sourcing spend and relating that back to the candidates as they move throughout the stage. So I mentioned a few metrics specifically in my presentation for that exact purpose. So source mix, where do your top candidates or prospects come from your sourcing analytics? And then candidate conversions per source, so comparing that. So you might get, 40% of your candidates from one particular source, but they only convert to 10% of the candidates that move forward. Taking a look at and comparing source mix and candidate conversions per source, I think is an excellent place to start. And then if you are tracking, your average source quality rating as you're moving through and comparing your ratings or your scores of candidates as they move through the process. So from an interview stage or quality of candidate, and taking a look at the quality of candidate per source as well, looking at either by role or by brand or by department or function so that you can drill down on what the right mix is. There are programmatic solutions now that can help you maximize your sourcing mix and use like real-time analytics, AI, algorithms. We have a solution called Smart Jobs that can help you get a jump start on that and look at that data in real time and help you manage that activity. But yeah, there's some good metrics that you can start with for sure.
Thanks, Anita.
Awesome. And then Jeremy, I know that you had kind of mentioned this at the end of one of your last points, but there was a question about preventing candidates from ghosting or how to maintain candidate interest.
Yeah, I think that goes back to definitely use branded content. Try to make your candidate experience as personalized and engaging as possible. I think that should really help reduce the ghosting of candidates because they're going to be super enthusiastic to make it through to the end of your process and to join your organization. So I think it's important to maybe throughout your process and emails, maybe link to different articles where you're mentioning your company's being spoken highly of. I think it's important that candidates are able to see different pictures of members of your team so they can kind of envision themselves as becoming the next member of the team and get really excited about it. That might be like linking to your corporate Instagram account or including things like that in the career section of your website. I mentioned this a couple of times, but I'm a huge proponent of using these video messages. We are sending these personalized videos and emails to candidates. So I think that goes a really long way too. And that might even just be when you do schedule a final round interview with the candidate, send them a quick video in that email to them too, to congratulate them, let them know sometimes you're available. And that video might be what I refer to as like an employee testimonial, where you've asked one of your team members to record a quick video explaining why they love working at your organization, what do they like about that role in particular. And I think that will really stand out to them and go a long way to get them really excited about making it through to the end of your process and ultimately working for you.
And I'm going to tie it back to the metrics. If you're finding that you have a lot of candidates that are ghosting you at the interview stage, dig into time and stage. How long are we making them wait from the time that we've moved them from stage to stage to stage? Because that might be something that you can look at from a bottleneck. If we are in the great rehire and people have options and you're slow to respond, you're slow to move them through, they don't know where they stand, but you have another organization that they're engaged with that is moving them through quickly and doing all the right things that were just described, and they've got a choice of where they're going to spend their time. That's something else. So, the why behind the ghosting is something that you should probably take a look into, and maybe your metrics are telling you a story that you need to pay attention to.
We have another question. What is a best tool for one-way video interviews?
SparkHire.com, but shameless plug, right? But Spark Hire is the #1 leader in our video interviewing space. So I definitely encourage you to check it out. We'll put some contact information on the screen in a moment. If you want more information, definitely send us an email, reach out to us, please.
Awesome. We have another question. In terms of metrics, would you recommend a social media check in addition to the background check before an offer would be extended?
I smirked when I saw this question. You might have seen it on my face because I think there's differing perspectives on this. There's an article that was released, Harvard Business Review, just this weekend. It was on their social media feeds around social media checks as being inherently biased and something that you would want to avoid. There are also schools of thought, depending on the role and the visibility of the role, in the relevance of a social media check in terms of the ability to perform and be successful in the role. So I think the guidance that I would say is, if this is something that you are looking at potentially doing, be very clear on what value the social media check is going to give to your interviewing process, the why behind it, ensuring that it's defensible before you proceed, because there's differing schools of thought there.
Yeah, good points. Anytime you're trying to implement a part of your process, really understand how are you making this structured so that it's going to help you learn what you need to know about the candidate to make a really good decision about
Absolutely. That. Yeah. I mean, if you're hiring for your social media influencer role, absolutely. Like that's flippant, but like that's an example where that is a bona fide reason to be looking at this, because it is indicative and an indicator of their social media presence, their influence, their style, etc. That's a legitimate reason. For a frontline worker in a restaurant industry, I'm not so sure that we would have a justifiable reason. Maybe we do, but you have to be very clear on your reason for doing that as a condition of employment, as a criteria of employment, along the same lines as a reference check.
We have another question. Are there some roles where one-sided interviews wouldn't be recommended?
Yeah, I think it depends on the circumstance. It might not be necessarily a great way in certain industries to maybe pre-screen a candidate for a CEO position. Maybe that's something that you want to discuss this more live with them, really understand more of the opportunity first. But I mean, we've really seen it work across the board for all sorts of different levels of positions, all sorts of different industries, different types of roles. For each company, it could be a little bit different, but that's something that we could help work with you on. If you do get started with Spark Hire, you'll have an onboarding specialist working with you that could help you identify like what are the very best positions where they could see you getting the greatest ROI from this.
Awesome. And we have another question. Can you give an example of how to use video message as a part of the hiring or onboarding process?
Yeah, I ended up bringing this up a moment ago with the employee testimonial, because I think that goes a long way. And there's a lot of ways you could use that video where you ask an employee to record a quick video, to talk about why they love working at your organization, what they like about that role. If you have their permission, I would definitely post that maybe on social media like LinkedIn, ask people if they know anyone that would be interested in the role or to apply for it themselves. It's a great way to promote an open role. It's a great way to include it maybe in an email at some point in your hiring process to a candidate too, to keep them engaged, make sure you're lowering that ghosting rate, keeping them enthusiastic. But then even as part of an onboarding process too, maybe before the candidate or the new hire, the employee is about to start their first day of work, you even want to send them a playlist of videos that they can watch from different team members. It's kind of like a good way to kind of personally introduce different team members to them and let them know what to expect on their first day. So there's tons of different applications for this too. Yeah.
Absolutely. And one that I would also add to that is also keeps them from ghosting on their first day too. If you keep them engaged and excited beyond just, you know, ramping them up for day one of what to expect, keeping them engaged and that forward momentum going so that if somebody, you know, sneaks in there or they've been distracted by another opportunity, they're less likely to follow that. You've won their hearts and mind, you're delivering a great candidate experience, which goes well beyond signing the offer letter. Showing up on day one, staying those first 90 days, that's a continuous cycle of engagement.
And one last super quick question before we wrap up. I know we're just out of time, but what was the link for the page that was the best resources about hiring success? Perfect. Nice and easy.
HiringSuccess.com.
Made it easy, right? Yeah.
All right. Well, we will wrap up our conversation here. We're right at noon. So thank you everyone for joining today. If you have additional questions or are interested in learning more, you can contact Spark Hire at marketing@sparkhire.com or SmartRecruiters at marketing@smartrecruiters.com, and we'll answer any questions. So thank you, everyone.
Thanks everyone for joining. Thank you.